Hello, and welcome to the Sonar Academy. I'm Scott Heron. I'm a director at Sonar. Welcome to you on this Thursday afternoon. And I'll give you a little bit of background on what the Sonar Academy is. We started a couple of months ago as an opportunity for in a 30-minute session to offer as much information and usefulness around a topic around marketing as we possibly could. And I'm really excited about our topic today, which is juggling now and next, how marketers can meet the relentless demands of today and find time to focus on the future. And part of the reason I'm so excited is that we have Teresa Sperti joining us today. And I had the opportunity to see Teresa speak about a year ago in Sydney at a Forrester conference. And I found that session to be really good. And I was a bit of I was so like afterwards coming up to you, Teresa, saying, oh, that was so great. I really loved how actionable that was. And I thought you were a great fit for the Sonar Academy and the topic today. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So one thing before starting out, I guess, Teresa, could you give us a little bit of background about your experience in marketing?
Sure. So I've spent 20 years in the marketing industry. I feel like I'm a little bit of a veteran, not that I like that term. So 20 years in the marketing space, and the last 13 have been in digital and data, specifically, really driving transformation in the digital age for organisations. My most recent role prior to founding my own organisation, Arktic Fox, was the CMO of World Vision. And that was kind of leading organisational and digital transformation. So pretty big role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So in terms of diving into this topic then, can you give us some context, I guess? I mean, you're working across, you're consulting and advising to a number of organizations. What are you seeing in terms of just the day-to-day, what's going on inside of marketing organizations today?
Sure. Well, there's a lot. I mean, you know, and I think if we think about the context that we're all operating within and the world is operating within, there was a lot going on even before kind of COVID hit. I personally believe marketing is going through one of the biggest systemic shifts of our time. We've operated in very stable environments for a long time. And because of the rapid change that's occurring at the moment for organisations globally, you know, there's a lot of disruption, there's heightened levels of competition. That means that the organisation is evolving, and a lot of the evolution's happening around the customer. And so that's inevitably driving evolution in the role of marketing within organisations and what marketers need to do within those organisations. So there is a huge amount of change currently happening within our industry. And that's wreaking a whole lot of havoc on marketing departments. And as I said, that's before kind of the challenges that have occurred with COVID, which has created a whole nother layer and level of challenge for marketers.
Yeah, it seems like a good word for it really is relentless. It just seems like ever changing, and COVID's really accelerated all that stuff. And thanks, Ian. One thing I forgot to mention to people who are attending today is if you have any questions, feel free to ask them using the web chat, and we'll try to hit it. I'll try to hit it as we go along, but if I don't do it in the fluidity of the conversation, we'll have some Q&A at the end. So Teresa, you're talking about some of these overarching key themes. And so can you talk about that a little bit more in terms of when people are talking about the future and some of those key things about what they're trying to do in the future, what those look like?
So strategic focus areas for marketers really is what you're effectively saying.
Yeah.
So there's a number of them. And so I probably won't cover off all of them, but let's talk about what some of them look like. So, you know, marketers are really grappling with how do we embed customer focus and a customer-driven approach within the organisation. And part of that's about customer experience, but it's broader than customer experience itself. We're seeing marketers own and drive things like the growth agenda. How do we create a clear path to grow and differentiate through creation of new customer value? Brand strategy and brand investment. Now, this is a really interesting one, right? Brand has always been the domain of marketers. And it's interesting, there's a Gartner just released their annual CMO survey last week, which talks about some of the most important capabilities for the marketing department to invest in. And brand strategy has come out as number one this year. And that tells you something. For a long time, marketers have been very, very focused on short term And that's been driven by things like share markets, particularly if you're a listed company. How do we continue to generate returns today for our shareholders? But that's sometimes been at the expense of brand. And so there's this kind of, I'd say, a bit of a brand revival going on.
Yeah.
And some marketers, I often hear, and we often hear talking to clients, that one of the things that they struggle with is how do we sell in the importance of brand and investment in brand.
Got it.
Data's another big one. And I think for anybody who's kind of read the news last week, you would have seen what happened with Woolworths. That's not going to be a kind of isolated incident. As regulation catches up around the world from a data economy perspective, we're going to see far greater focus on data, and that's going to have an impact on marketers. It's going to be part of their strategic agenda if it's not already today. How are you managing privacy from a customer perspective? And then, of course, things like accelerating and advancing the digital agenda. That's been a really big priority for marketing departments, driven again by COVID. So, there's not, there are definitely a host of, or a plethora of, strategic areas of focus for marketing teams, and that's beyond the BAU and managing the day-to-day.
Yeah. And if I look at some of those strategic areas you've highlighted, it's like, data, brand, the growth agenda, customer experience. If you had each one of those lined up, there's a thread that you could cut across all of them around innovation, which again is just one of those things that marketers seem to be called on to deliver on, but it's like, it's a really sort of nebulous thing. And how do you actually find the focus, and what's your take on that in terms of like the approach to innovation in marketing for companies?
So what we often hear from marketers is they're really struggling to find the time to innovate, and that innovation is incremental at best. So, it's an interesting conundrum we find ourselves, because we have many strategic priorities and areas of focus, and that means we need to do things differently, and often that means we need to innovate. But the first thing I would say about this is that it's okay that innovation is incremental. It doesn't have to always be about the big bets and the big ticket items. It can definitely be about continuous improvement. So it's some of this is about how you think, and it's about an and rather than an or. But what I would say, and there is always a but, you've got a caveat with saying that continuous improvement alone is not going to provide a step change in what you do and how you operate. So it is really an and for marketing departments that are struggling with innovation, it is important to have a really intentional approach, one that combines both continuous improvement with some additional kind of having a few strategic big bets or mid-range ideas that you're going to also try to innovate around. And that doesn't need to be many, right? You might decide that there's 2 to 3 big things that we want to go after over the course of a year, and combine that with your continuous improvement agenda. I've used the word intentional, and I've used that for a reason. I think if you're not intentional about anything, nothing changes. And so to help foster things like innovation, you need to look at where you need to look at how you're going to make it part of your agenda. And so I like to look at, where can it be adapted within your existing, or adopted within your existing activities, rather than it all feeling like new and additional stuff that we have to put on top of our workloads. It makes it feel more palatable. You need to think about innovation and how it can be done in different ways. So we see in areas like technology or IT, they leverage hackathons as a way to drive innovation. And that's a great way that you can carve out some time and mental headspace to tackle innovation and tackle some of these bigger ideas without it feeling like, again, a really significant burden. In addition to that, we think it's really important to celebrate innovation as it happens. And that reinforces good behaviours. The more that people are celebrated and rewarded for testing and trialing new things, the more likely they are going to do it again.
I think that's a good point. And I guess there's also the point, like, even if you learn something from a failure of innovation, that type of thing as well. Still
absolutely. No, and I think that's a really good point. Part of what holds innovation back is often that organisations don't celebrate failure and they don't see it as learning, and people are punished for something failing. You've got to be prepared to put your neck out there and to know that some of that is part of the journey, right? You might fail the first time, but that learning might take you to the next great idea.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I like your approach to innovation. So it's sort of an extension off BAU for some of that incremental innovation. So it's tangible and it's not bigger than Ben-Hur, and you can set yourself on a way, but you still have some of those 2 or 3 really big bets as well, but be picky about those so it's in line with your direction and that type of thing as well.
Absolutely. I think this is where picking the right ideas, not good ideas, helps. So based on your strategy, what are the right ideas to innovate around, not just good ideas? Because that's sometimes where you can become a little bit undone as well.
Okay, so we've talked about some of those key themes and innovation being a thread across all of that. One problem that I've seen in organizations is they might have a lot of energy out of the gates. They might have the themes that might be all ready to rock, but then 3 months later, something happens and everything throws it up in the air and everything's forgotten. So how do you make that stick? Like, what are some things to try to make things actually stay the course for longer if possible?
So there's a few things here. The first is that absolutely, we see this happen all the time. And part of it is we are trained as marketers to value or to gain benefit or confidence from short-term result. So we run a campaign and then we're rewarded because we can see a result. So part of it's shifting mindset. That change is a longer term journey, and that might mean we need to change what success looks like. So that's the first thing. The second is around measurement. So measurement plays a really big role in ensuring that people stay the course. So how do you measure success as a team collectively for the outcomes, and how do you measure that individually? It's funny, the saying goes, what gets measured gets managed, and I truly believe that the more that you align your KPIs and measurement framework to not just to the short term, but to the longer term strategic initiatives or transformation agenda or whatever it is, the more likely it is you're going to be successful. Because people are going to have to front up and talk about why or why not something has been delivered. And I think the other thing to make it stick is it's important for leaders to model and reinforce what's important and why it's important. So, too often we'll see a leader come and advise on a strategy, and then it's kind of, the belief is everybody needs to start making that happen. And then they look around and go, why hasn't anything changed? We have to reinforce the importance of it. It might take people 3 or 4 times to actually understand where you're trying to go and what it actually means in terms of change. And equally, leaders need to model the behaviour because teams pick up on what's important based on where leaders are spending time and energy and focus. And so it's really about modelling what's important and doing that consistently in order for people to drive their focus, energy and attention on those strategic initiatives and priorities.
And I think related to that, there's a question. So in terms of identifying the difference between what's the right idea and a good idea. So
how do you do that?
How do you do that, or give some context around that one?
Sure. So for me, it's probably fairly simple, and it comes back to what are your strategic goals that you're trying to achieve, and does it align with those or not? Because I think there is so much opportunity in market to gain advantage of, but nothing thrives if you're trying to focus on everything, right? And so how do you make decisions on where to spend your time, energy, and focus? Well, strategic priorities and marketing priorities start to give us really valuable cues on what is important, and to help us determine where to focus our time and energy and what those good ideas look like. The other thing is that I would say is that we may think that we've got a really good idea, but we haven't validated it in market. And so this is where customer feedback becomes really important, and understanding our customers, because just because we think it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it's going to create value in the lives of consumers. So that, I would say, is the other measure that helps you determine and distinguish between what's a good idea versus what are some of the right ideas.
Yeah, I think that's great. So there's the organizational context and the executive, there's the measurement, there's the executive pointing the direction in terms of where the strategy is going. So making it a good fit for that. And then also validating it with real customer insight and actually giving it a shot through a pilot or something as well to help to make sure it's a good idea that way.
I'm still surprised today at how much time marketers spend in the office, and how much, I think what the data economy has also done is we've started to really value quantitative data and not necessarily value qualitative. And sometimes we can sit and crunch the numbers and gain a series of brilliant insights from our analytics team, but we don't necessarily understand why. And that's what talking to our customers enables us to do, is to really understand the why.
And I imagine a marketer in a larger organization, those customer insights are really so powerful in terms of having a seat at the table and talking about what the customer is thinking and doing. It seems like people should spend more time out of the office. Unfortunately, maybe not these days.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What about in terms of the now versus the next? I'm just using another question here.
Sure.
If an organization is causing unintentional pain for its customers at any touch point, sort of now, should they focus on innovation for the future, or fixing that pain first?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So if I think about customer experience, I think about it probably in two parts. How do you create a frictionless experience, which is hygiene? And then how do you surprise and delight and differentiate? And so, if you look at a lot of the research that's come out of Forrester, I think it's Forrester or Gartner, it's Forrester, they talk about Australian organisations, a lot of time, effort and energy is about improving experience to be frictionless. But what that creates is a lot of sameness. There's not really a lot of differentiation, because the investment isn't happening in experience evolution that surprises and delights and differentiates your brand and your offering. So I would say that it's not an easy question to answer. Part of it depends on what those pain points are and how problematic they are. And this is where the data does help. If the data is telling you that some of those pain points are causing critical issues around things like churn, then I would say it probably has to be your number one priority. But if you're struggling to really differentiate in market, then it might be that surprise and delight and the way that experience is packaged and augments your core offering to drive differentiation, that might be the place to start. So it really depends on, it's a vague answer, but it really depends on the circumstance and the organisation.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it would absolutely depend. We talked a little bit about this, but maybe it's worth going a little bit deeper. So now, the relentless demands of the current state and short-termism, if you want to call it that.
Yes.
But then thinking about the long term and trying to paint a picture for where the long term's going. How does that relate to, like, when I see marketing, what they're measured on, what the KPIs are? Quite often it's the short term. And knowing the CMO's tenure isn't that long and that type of thing. What do you think, what should be the right marketing metrics or KPIs? How should a marketing team be evaluated so that there is a balance of now and next? How do you get that done?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I I would say that marketers need to influence the measurement framework. So whilst there'll be kind of top-down objectives that are provided, and there's executive scorecards, etc., often some organisations don't know what they don't know, and don't often understand some of the benefits of investment in some of these strategic areas. And so it's our job to educate leaders within the organisation about what the measurement framework should look like that enables us a more balanced approach to measure short-term results and long-term.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably not the answer that people want, because that means we have to influence, but the reality is that that if your organisation is incredibly short-term focused and all of the measurement is short-term focused, and that's cascading down to the marketing team, then that's a signal and sign to the marketing team that they have to start engaging at a senior level to start to shape what is the measurement framework that helps us get a more holistic view of how we're performing across the short term and the long term. Because when you start to lean into conversations like brand and brand investment, it's really difficult to have those conversations if you haven't already educated the executive around the benefits of investing in brand and the potential return that comes from it. And that's not something you can necessarily measure over a short period of time.
Yeah, and there seems to be a leap of faith needed, or trust in the CMO to take that brand leap and invest in that for the future.
Absolutely.
So what about finding the space? So we've talked about themes, we've talked about innovation, we've talked about making it stick and some of the measurement and KPIs and that type of thing. But if you're a CMO or a senior marketer, and you know you've got to think about the future agenda, but this relentless demands going on here and now, what's some advice you'd impart in terms of how to find the time and focus for the future?
Sure. I would divide my advice into 3 core areas. So things you can do for yourself, things that you can, or to think about how to engage the wider business. So things you can do to engage the wider business, and how to make the marketing team work a little bit smarter. And I think all of this comes to, if I think about a macro theme, the most important things as a starting point that sits above those 3 areas is you've got to realise that you are in control of something. Because if you don't believe you're in control of anything and everything's just happening around you, then you won't feel like you can change anything. So these 3 areas, it does in part come back to control. So what you need to do for yourself. So in that space, I would say give yourself permission to elevate out of the day-to-day and focus on the future. And the second one in this space is stop allowing the urgent to trump the important. So think about how to intentionally invest your time and energy, really carving out some dedicated space for the important stuff. And that may not be every week. It might be something that you do once a fortnight, and it doesn't need to be all day. It might be 2 hours in the morning before you come into the office, or 2 hours before you start your day. So there's some of the things you can do for yourself. But again, you've got to feel like you're in control to be able to make those calls and give yourself permission to do those things, to step away from the office. How you engage the wider business, I think, is really important, because often marketing becomes a bit of a hub that various parts of the business is really reliant on. And often we can be given a whole lot of conflicting priorities from the business. And the business often doesn't understand how many conflicting priorities we're being given as a department. So particularly where you've got an organisation where there is a series of different sales teams or functions that marketing is working with, often one function won't know what the other function is asking of marketing. And so here what's really important is you lean on your business stakeholders to help you work through what is the core priorities. That really pushes the onus back onto them, that this is a shared problem. It's not your problem to solve. And it also helps you manage stakeholder expectations. And then finally, from a team perspective, you do need to think about how you're going to create a bit of a clear lane to accelerate initiatives. You know, and that might be that you carve out part of somebody's role to start to drive some of those strategic agenda items. It might be that you have a tools down day once a fortnight to do it. You know, there are different ways to do it. But the other thing that I find that typically happens within marketing functions is that we don't want to stop anything. So we have these new areas of focus and we try and do them on top of everything that we're doing. Mm-hmm. And we often don't ask ourselves what we're going to stop in order to make way or make space. So knowing what to stop and being really disciplined about that, once you make a decision to stop something, to do it and follow through with it is also really important.
I think those are really good points. Like I find marketing has sort of got, they love to say yes to everything.
Yes, they do.
and to everyone. I really like your point about the visibility that the different parts of the organization may not know all the demands that are being put on marketing. So the visibility, I think, is a really excellent point. Another thing that I find really useful is filters. So if everybody agrees on the filters that marketing is going to use to identify which projects they're going to do and which projects they're not going to do, then that can help to navigate things as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great piece of advice.
Okay, so we've only got 3 minutes left.
Sure.
Do you have any other parting thoughts or advice you want to offer on the topic?
Well, if we've got 3 minutes left, is there any other questions that
good question
that are worth answering?
There's one other one that we haven't done, which was more how do we wean an organization off vanity metrics and identifying using actionable metrics?
So it depends what the vanity metrics are. I would say that vanity metrics are often used to measure things that we find more difficult to measure. And so I would say to wean them off, you need to really think about demonstrating stronger connection between the real metrics and how that drives business performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember I had worked with the clients, the vanity metrics was downloads. And so they were like, how many people have downloaded the app was the main kind of thing. But it's like, well, how many people are actually using the app? And
yeah, there you go.
Measure that type of thing.
Yeah.
And once the business being a business, the core metrics were around money and people actually using it. But it was a work in progress. It took a very long time to get even the senior leadership on board for the useful metrics.
I think if you understand correlation between a metric and how that drives business performance, that's a really good place to start. If we know that, you know, a certain metric is an indicator of financial performance or brand performance, then, and you can demonstrate that correlation, you're much more likely then to shift executives' focus away from the vanity metrics that don't matter.
Yeah, good point. Are there any other questions? No? All right. So yeah, why don't you, do you have anything else you want to say, Teresa?
Look, I think the parting message I would give to everyone is that a lot of the kind of juggle is about mindset. Focus on what's in your control and start there. And it's often more than what you think. So, you know, part of it is, you know, shifting your belief in terms of what you can do to make a difference. And if you start there, you'll probably start to realize that the juggle becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, I really like your point about just elevating yourself, giving yourself permission to elevate yourself out of the day-to-day and finding ways to do that is a really important starting point.
Absolutely. Great.
Great. Well, thank you very much for our Sonar Academy session here. I think the guys would have gotten a lot out of this session. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.